Tonight, testing times for Victoria as coronavirus cases continue to surge.
It's re-emerging because people aren't doing things as stringently as they might have done a month, 2 months ago.
Also tonight, former High Court Judge Dyson Heydon found to have sexually harassed several female associates. Better late than never, Victoria's snow season kicks off, restrictions and all. And riding out the storm, Melbourne's NRL team heads north as other states remove the welcome mat. Good evening, James Hancock with ABC News. Victoria could be teetering on the brink of a dreaded second wave. An alarming increase in coronavirus cases continues. 16 people have tested positive overnight. More than a third of those are linked to known outbreaks. Authorities are focusing their attention on hotspots in 6 Melbourne council areas, where numbers are rising rapidly. Those council areas are home to almost a fifth of the state's entire population. As state political reporter Richard Willingham explains, the government has stopped short of locking down affected suburbs.
In a city divided by COVID-19, the fears are very real for residents and business.
It's worrying for customers still not come to this area because it's scared for this area.
Despite tight restrictions, Melbourne is Australia's coronavirus laggard, with booming cases in 6 council areas prompting this advice.
Reconsider travel or don't make plans to travel into these hotspot areas.
Those hotspots, Casey, Cardinia, Darebin, Moreland, Hume and Brimbank, are home to more than 1 million people. Keilor Downs an area of acute concern. That cluster is possibly linked to Alban Vale Primary School, where another 2 teachers have tested positive.
People are fatiguing about the really clear messages. This is a long battle and it's a complex one, and there's no single silver bullet. That it's re-emerging because people aren't doing things as stringently as they might have done a month, 2 months ago.
Other states have seen enough.
People should consider whether they should be travelling to Melbourne at this point in time whilst community transmission is where it is.
The dramatic health warning has caused a run on COVID testing. Mobile teams will also be sent out into trouble spots, police enforcement will be stepped up and efforts boosted to educate non-English speaking communities.
We're going to focus on shopping centres and train stations as well. And as I said, there will be door knocking that will happen, and there will be round tables with many multicultural communities in those hotspot areas.
Councils were caught on the hop by the warning.
Unfortunately, though, it's a wide brushstroke to say all of Cardinia Shire. I think we need to focus on exactly this area where these cases are so we can understand the cluster and deal with it.
We would recommend an aisle between each other.
Despite the travel advice, some restrictions have lifted, with the first cinemas reopening and gyms pumping again in a limited way. Pubs no longer need to serve food with drinks, but an increased patron limit has been put on hold, a blow for businesses who'd catered for bigger crowds.
This is a government that really does need to look after those small businesses who, through no fault of their own, have been left in the lurch by this sudden change in restrictions.
At the moment, people are just being asked to stay away or to stay within their region, like here in Moreland. It is frustrating, but that frustration could become anger and despair if Premier Daniel Andrews is forced to impose strict local lockdowns because cases continue to rise. Richard Willingham, ABC News, Melbourne.
Victorians haven't been barred from going away for the school holidays, but big gatherings aren't allowed and authorities don't want people from Melbourne's hotspots travelling anywhere. The snow season opened today, 2 weeks later than normal, and regional businesses are counting on the holiday trade. Erin Somerville reports.
It's better late than never for Victoria's ski resorts.
It feels really good. I haven't touched snow in a really long time.
With snow falling on cue, the delayed opening of the ski season resulted in a flurry of bookings.
Very busy. There's a lot of tickets that have sold out on the ski lifts, with their capacity limitations in place as well.
But as businesses prepared for a bumper season, news came that the further easing of physical distancing limits has been postponed.
Bushfires, lack of tourism, and now the stress of coronavirus. Yeah, it's the biggest challenge I've ever faced.
Milch Cafe ordered enough food to feed crowds of 50 at a time, but the restrictions mean its limit is suddenly back to 14.
We're going to have to hope that people are willing to eat takeaway as opposed to a dine-in experience.
With snow forecast this week and school holidays approaching, the next few weeks were highly anticipated in the Alps. But now the future is looking cloudy once again.
Glenys Peacock desperately wants tourists to return to her ski hire business, but is worried about the health risks for her staff.
Having close contact with people who don't live here and, the visitors that we welcome but we're nervous about as well, it's high anxiety.
COVID-free regional areas may eventually get an early reprieve from restrictions, but it won't be in time for holidays.
It's a consideration down the track, but at this point...
For school holidays?
Not for school holidays, no. I think we need to keep the brakes on at the moment.
Our businesses have been really decimated and it is really critical that we start to recover if possible, but we have to do that as safely as we can.
Up on the mountain, they'd love to see you, but not if you're unwell.
They need to stay at home. I know that they've spent thousands of dollars on an amazing holiday, but if you think that you're sick, you need to get tested. You need to know those answers before you come up here.
Erin Somerville, ABC News, Falls Creek.
It's not just the Victorian outbreak that has health authorities on high alert this week. The World Health Organisation has also reported the biggest ever global increase in cases in a single day. Analyst Casey Briggs looks at how concerned we should be.
There's both good news and bad news today out of Victoria. 16 new cases is fewer than yesterday and fewer than the day before. That's a good thing, but we are still seeing an increase in the number of cases of community transmission, those cases where a source of infection hasn't been found. 12 today, although they're not all today's cases. It takes some time to investigate all possible links. So hopefully, given that we're seeing a decrease in the total numbers, we might see this start to turn around as well. Community transmission remains exceedingly rare across the rest of the country. We had one case of it today in New South Wales, but to find the most recent case before that nationally, you have to go back a full week. So why is Victoria facing these outbreaks and no other state? Well, one reason is that we know that clusters spur this virus on, and Victoria has had a run of them. We also know that Victoria never got cases as low as many of the other states. So when restrictions started easing, Victoria was always the strongest candidate for a new outbreak. Another possibility, could Victorians be adhering to social distancing less? Well, the data doesn't seem to support that theory. Here's Apple Maps data suggesting that, in fact, Melburnians are getting out and about less at the moment than Sydney-siders. Partly this outbreak is just bad luck. It's worth keeping in mind, though, as well, that compared to the rest of the world, Australia's numbers are still very small. Brazil is now averaging more than 30,000 cases every day, while the US has taken a turn for the worse as well. This line is Australia.
The Governor of the Reserve Bank has warned Australia and the world will be living for years in the shadow of COVID-19. Philip Lowe says interest rates will also remain at their current low for years, but many Australians will be reluctant to borrow. Political editor Andrew Plobin explains.
Re-emergence from the depths requires learning to live with the threat of COVID-19.
We have to ensure that we can run our economy, run our lives, run our communities alongside this virus.
Victoria's outbreak showing recovery will be slow and with setbacks.
There will be outbreaks, there will be cases. What matters is that we've built the protections to deal with them.
Complacency almost as much the enemy as coronavirus.
We only have to look south of the border to see what's happened there. That could be us.
This is, as the Premier said, a wake-up call.
If this outbreak escalated and we had several hundred cases, that would be the sort of situation where I would be extremely concerned.
A second wave would come at massive cost, $80 billion according to government estimates, in lost wages, fewer jobs, lower profits and extra stimulus, hitting an already fragile economy.
If they continue to bungle the recovery, then the unemployment queues will be longer, the recovery will be harder, the downturn will be deeper.
The Reserve Bank Governor warning the world will be living for years under the shadow of the virus.
I think it's likely we're going to see interest rates at their current level
for years.
Philip Lowe says Australians will be risk-averse and reluctant to borrow for some time, despite rock-bottom interest rates, which are a symptom of economic ill health. A second wave of infections could drastically slow the post-COVID recovery, increasing the need to extend taxpayer support. Every government now on tenterhooks, watching what happens in Victoria. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
One of the most senior legal figures in Australia sexually harassed several female associates, according to an independent inquiry. Former High Court Justice Dyson Heydon has categorically denied the claims. Here's the ABC's High Court reporter, Elizabeth Byrne.
The findings against former Justice Dyson Heydon are a seismic hit on the legal fraternity and the highest court in the land. An independent inquiry found Mr Heydon had sexually harassed 6 High Court staff. The women worked as judges' associates. High Court Chief Justice Susan Kiefel confirmed there'd been a lengthy investigation of the allegations and that the women's complaints were believed. We're ashamed that this could have happened at the High Court of Australia. We have made a sincere apology to the 6 women whose complaints were borne out. Justice Kiefel says she personally apologised to the former associates. Appointed to the High Court in 2003 by John Howard, Mr Heydon spent a decade at the court on many high-profile cases. In 2014, Tony Abbott appointed Mr Heydon to lead the Royal Commission into Trade Union Governance and Corruption.
The lawyer of the very highest understanding, a person of the very deepest intellect.
Mr Heydon has denied the claims. His lawyers releasing a statement saying to the Sydney Morning Herald, "Any allegation of predatory behaviour or breaches of the law is categorically denied. If any conduct has caused offence, that result was inadvertent and unintended. He apologises for any offence caused." It's understood the women are considering their legal options.
Police are treating a deadly stabbing attack in the southern English town of Reading on the weekend as terrorism. A 25-year-old man is being held on suspicion of killing 3 people as they sat in a park. The British Security Service was aware of the man, but say he wasn't considered an immediate risk. Europe correspondent Linton Besser reports.
25-year-old Khairi Saadallah had fled Libya's civil war and sought asylum in Britain, but on the weekend he allegedly shattered the peace he'd once sought out, turning Reading's Forbury Gardens into a crime scene.
I saw a massive knife in his hand, probably at least 5 inches minimum, and then he turned and started looking towards us, and that's when I just started shouting, "Run."
When the local police arrived, they tackled the man and held him on suspicion of murder.
Within 5 minutes of the first call, officers had apprehended a man and made an arrest.
Later that night, specialist officers raided a nearby apartment building.
Whoa!
And by the next morning, the investigation had been transferred to the police's counter-terrorism command. This is the 3rd terrorism incident so far this year in Britain, and the latest in a rash of lone wolf stabbing attacks that are highly difficult for law enforcement and security agencies to prevent.
From our inquiries undertaken so far, officers have found nothing to suggest that there was anyone else involved in this attack.
Late on Sunday, Khairi Saadallah emerged as the man in custody, with reports he was previously known to the security services, who believed he had mental health and violence problems.
If there are lessons that we need to learn about how we handle such cases, how we handle the events leading up to such cases, then we will learn those lessons.
This is the 5th lone wolf attack in the UK by a perpetrator using a knife since December 2018. Linton Besser, ABC News, London.
Still to come this hour, Alan Kohler begins a special series on the virus-induced recession.
I think that we'll be remembering the recession after we have stopped thinking a lot about the pandemic itself.
Some businesses will not survive. They're just never coming back. And that means that our economy will be weaker longer.
Also, Dr. Norman Swan looks into the latest coronavirus spike. That's coming up.
Homicide Squad detectives are investigating the stabbing death of a man in Melbourne CBD this morning. Emergency services were called to Market Street around 5 o'clock this morning after reports a man had been stabbed during a fight. It's believed the offenders fled before police arrived. The injured 21-year-old was taken to hospital where he later died. Police are trying to work out if the victim and offenders knew each other. The family of an Indigenous woman who was allegedly killed by her former partner in February has finally been able to go public with concerns about how the Department of Human Services failed to intervene. A suppression order was initially put in place to protect the children. It's now been lifted, allowing Nolene Dalzell's loved ones to speak out. Karen Percy reports.
We can now speak her name, Nolene Michelle Dalzell. The mother of 3 died at her home in Seaford.
She was a good person and she was a great mum to those kids. And yeah, what happened to her was just tragic. It shouldn't have happened.
It was just a few weeks after her 49th birthday. Her partner and the children's father, James Fairhall, is charged with her murder. Their teenage children, Paige, Zach and Olivia, are now living with their aunt and uncle.
Even today, it still seems very surreal to me.
At her funeral, she was remembered as a woman who loved her football, especially her beloved Bombers. She loved the beach and dolphins and was fiercely protective of her kids.
God, amongst your angels, you'll notice one with a cheeky grin. She might have an oversized hoodie, maybe a beanie, Doc Marten boots. Protect her, take care of her. For us, she'll be sadly missed.
But those who knew her well also knew her life was marred by violence and loss, and she struggled with drugs.
Before she died, I think she was trying to get away from that habit, stuff like that, but unfortunately, she didn't clearly get away from it, couldn't get out of it.
Her family says government protection agencies should have done more to intervene.
When there's so many red flags and so many times people threaten to do things, and you've got a young family at stake, more action, not talking.
James Fairhall has not yet entered a plea and will return to court next month. Karen Percy, ABC News, Melbourne.
The Premier Daniel Andrews has announced a shake-up of his cabinet following last week's branch stacking scandal that claimed 3 ministers. Melissa Horne has lost the high-profile public transport portfolio but will take over Marlene Caruza's role as Consumer Affairs and Gaming Minister. Former Minister for Corrections Ben Carroll is now Minister for Public Transport and also Roads, while former Roads Minister Yala Pulford becomes Employment Minister and also acquires sacked Minister Adam Somyurek's small business portfolio. The 3 newest members of Cabinet were sworn in today. Danny Pearson is now Assistant Treasurer. Natalie Hutchins will serve as Minister for the Prevention of Family Violence as well as Corrections, and Sean Lean takes over the local government portfolio. If you could claim your local newspaper subscription as a tax deduction, would it make you more likely to sign up? It's one suggestion being floated to safeguard suburban and regional news outlets as coronavirus exacerbates the financial woes facing Australia's media industry. Here's political reporter Matthew Doran.
Late last year, Anthony Piovesan caught wind of backroom brawling at his local council.
It just seems to escalate into a chaotic game of in-house politics.
He wrote a series of explosive stories about the Whittlesea Council on Melbourne's northern outskirts, the revelations prompting the state government to step in and sack the council.
It was a story that attracted quite significant national interest. My little rag started all of that.
Such scrutiny is vital for local communities, but that kind of reporting is coming under increasing threat.
We've lost, just since COVID, 200 publications.
The competition watchdog is currently investigating how the media can survive in the digital age, as advertising revenue crashes, threatening the viability of companies large and small and the careers of thousands of journalists. One proposal is to reclassify news outlets, acknowledging the public good they deliver to communities and allowing subscriptions to be treated the same as donations to charity.
I think we should make it easier for philanthropists by getting tax deduction status.
It's something Matt Nichols would welcome. He's about to launch a new fortnightly newspaper in far north Queensland, servicing remote towns in the Gulf country.
These communities are so vibrant and there's so much industry and tourism that potentially, it should have a voice.
He believes communities are starting to realise what they could lose, and his newspaper is part of a wave of small, not-for-profit news outlets popping up around the country.
Independent people and good community-minded people are getting together and making a change.
Media companies have long argued they need support to level the playing field, as big tech companies such as Facebook and Google benefit from the hard work of journalists without paying for it. But with Facebook already saying it's not prepared to cough up, there's a hope the federal government might consider more novel approaches like this one. Matthew Doran, ABC News, Canberra.
Enjoying time in front of the television when you can't see can be a challenge. The ABC and SBS have launched a new tool to describe what's happening on the screen, making popular programs more accessible for visually impaired people. Disability Affairs reporter Naz Campanella explains how it works.
Australian cartoon Bluey has been a hit across the world for many children.
Whose voice was that?
But for kids who are blind, like 4-year-old Jem Maguire, understanding the pictures without her family describing them hasn't been easy.
Jem loves it, but she misses big chunks. Or I'm there, or Mum's there, and we're just filling in the gaps.
It's a similar story for Wayne Hawkins, who hasn't enjoyed watching TV since losing his sight 15 years ago.
I find television very frustrating, difficult to watch. I don't know what's happening.
A stealth walker wears... Now the federal government has given SBS and the ABC $2 million each to provide audio description on dramas, documentaries and children's shows.
Bingo wags her tail.
Audio description is a narration track added into TV content to explain visual elements like facial expressions and landscapes.
The tendrils of red grevillea blooms are bright in a garden. Costa walks past. He has a shaggy dark beard.
It comes after a long campaign by advocacy groups.
It just enables people to participate in that social conversation that's really important and is often driven by the media.
Audio description will benefit the more than 100,000 Australians who are blind or have low vision. It's part of a broader move towards accessibility, with platforms like Netflix introducing the technology on many of its original shows. This family is hoping equal access becomes a constant throughout their daughter's life.
Jem deserves to have the same level of accessibility as everybody else.
The puppy's bedroom.
Which means there will be more Bluey in this household.
I think that's a very good idea if the TV shows me.
Naz Campanella, ABC News.
To finance now, and here's Alan Kohler.
Well, a day of aimless trading on the share market, with investors not really knowing what to make of all the coronavirus news that's flooding in every minute of every day. Banks and resources stocks were well bid today, but toll road operator Transurban and travel stocks like Qantas and Flight Centre were not, which may have something to do with this. The global count of COVID-19 cases is not actually flattening, and concerns are emerging in many places, not just Victoria, about a second wave. Nevertheless, restaurant bookings are on the way back, especially in Australia, now only about 15% below February levels, which is quite surprising. Global bookings are also rising, but still down 65%, and in the UK, everyone's apparently staying at home still. This chart is a news sentiment index put together by the Reserve Bank of Australia. Now, it's taken from 300,000 articles published between September 1987 and April 2020 by more than 600 Australian newspapers. They count positive words, subtract negative words and divide by the total number of words. So the RBA News Sentiment Index is at a record low, below the GFC. Shares in New York fell a bit on Friday, rose in London but were mixed in Asia today. Commodities mostly went up and the dollar is trading a little higher at 68.6 US cents. And that's finance.
The NRL has moved the Storm's match against the Warriors on Friday from Melbourne to Sydney because of the number of COVID-19 cases in Victoria. And new restrictions mean the Storm will probably have to move interstate to stay in the competition.
Last month, the Storm gathered in Outbreak to resume training. They'll soon be heading further north. The increase of coronavirus cases in Victoria has led the NRL to move Friday's match against the Warriors from Melbourne to Sydney. New restrictions in Queensland mean it could be a long stay for the Storm.
I have concerns about Victoria. The Health Minister has concerns about Victoria. There is a lot of active community transmission happening in Victoria.
Queensland has declared any person coming to the state from Melbourne will have to spend 14 days in quarantine. The Warriors game has been moved because the New Zealand side was due to play in the Gold Coast a fortnight later. Next week, the Roosters are scheduled to play in Melbourne and then Townsville a week later.
We have to think about not only the Melbourne Storm being located in Victoria, but we also have to think about teams travelling to Victoria to play them.
We've kind of braced for the potential that we might need to relocate and potentially play some of our home games up in Queensland or New South Wales.
It would be a tough blow for a side that has only played 2 of its opening 6 matches at home, but Storm players insist they'll all be ready to relocate if need be.
Looking at the issue, it pales in significance compared to, some of the real issues that Australians are going through every day at the moment.
A decision to relocate is expected in the next 24 hours, with the Storm preferencing a move to Queensland. Peter Lusted, ABC News, Melbourne.
The AFL has banned teams from full contact training in groups of more than 9 players in the wake of Conor McKenna's positive COVID-19 test. The new protocols will be in force for at least the next 4 weeks and could make life difficult for players putting their hand up for selection.
Former Adelaide Crow Josh Jenkins is desperate to play for his new club Geelong. But even when he's fully recovered from a back injury, new training protocols mean there'll be limited opportunities for him to break into the side.
It's going to impact the players who aren't getting selected and who aren't playing. That 15 to 25 minute burst of full-on contact and match simulation and tackling and marking is so important for sort of setting the tone.
Essendon Football Club can't train at all. They're waiting for the results of the team's COVID-19 tests, meaning the club still doesn't know how many players will be unavailable for Saturday's match against Carlton. The consequences of McKenna's positive test are wide-reaching. WA's Police Commissioner says how the AFL deals with the situation will determine whether Victorian teams can travel to Perth.
We want to know what are the consequences of that alleged breach. Has it infected other players, other officials, other members of the community?
Up to 30,000 AFL fans will be permitted at Perth Stadium, but quarantine arrangements for the West Coast Eagles and Fremantle haven't been decided, nor have their return dates from their Gold Coast hub. As for Victorian teams,
the thing about COVID is once it gets away from you, it's very hard to put the genie back in the bottle.
if the genie is out of the bottle in Victoria, Essendon may need more than 3 wishes. Catherine Murphy, ABC News.
Now let's take a look at the weather. Widespread morning fog patches cleared to a mostly cloudy day across the state. The coldest place overnight was Falls Creek, dropping to -4. Good news for the snow season. Away from the Alps, it got down to 0 at Ararat. Showers continued today, mostly over southern and western Victoria, and there were isolated thunderstorms for the Central District this afternoon. Several spots hit 14 degrees today, including Mildura, Bairnsdale and Orbost. In town, the temperature dropped to 8 degrees, reaching 13 this afternoon, right now sitting on 11 degrees around the suburbs. Interstate today, sunny for Darwin and Brisbane. A broad and complex low pressure system is affecting Australia's southeast. The low is expected to keep shifting east tomorrow and on Wednesday. Then on Wednesday night, a narrow ridge of high pressure will extend over Victoria. Tomorrow will bring scattered showers, mostly over Victoria's south and east, becoming isolated in the west. Perhaps between 20 and 30 millimetres of rain for Hobart tomorrow, showers easing in Perth. Mostly dry over the far northwest, areas of morning fog for the southwest, then a chance of fog at night for all districts. Cloudy skies across the state's east. Look out for fog in the early morning, more snow for alpine areas. On the bay's west to northwesterly winds 10 to 15 knots, shifting southerly early in the morning, then easing to 5 to 10 knots in the evening. There's a strong wind warning tomorrow for the west coast and East Gippsland coast, and a sheep grazier's warning for these areas. Cloudy tonight in Melbourne. There's a high chance of showers and a slight chance for thunderstorm. Patches of morning fog tomorrow. A high chance of showers with partly cloudy skies. And looking ahead, Wednesday's mostly cloudy 16. Expect areas of morning fog. There's a medium chance of showers, most likely in the morning. For Thursday, showers increasing 16 degrees again. And that is ABC News for this evening. Stand by for 7:30.